If you would turn in your Bibles to Exodus chapter 20, today is going to be the last of our series in Exodus going over Moses and the life of Moses. We've kind of looked at Moses the last 3 weeks from his birth to his calling and then the coming out, the plagues of Israel, the Passover, and then we looked at the Red Sea and the miracles that God performed delivering the nation of Israel from the hand of Pharaoh last week. And, that we only need to be still and the Lord will fight for us. And so that was a really encouraging lesson, I think, to take away, that even when we have moments of doubt and unbelief, that the nation of Israel was literally staring at a pillar of fire and having doubts about the ability of the Lord to deliver them from the hand of Pharaoh. And so it's natural that sometimes our faith is going to have conflicts, it's going to have moments of doubt. And I take great comfort in knowing that in those moments that I'm not staring at a literal pillar of fire and still doubting the ability of the Lord to come and intervene for me, that our faith is so strong and it is such a blessing to have it. And that when we have doubts, we need to give those to the Lord, seek the Lord, and watch as he fights our battles for us. And that he can fight our battles for us. Today, the last thing we're going to look at in Exodus before we move on to a different part of the Bible is going to be the Ten Commandments. So we're going to be in Exodus chapter 20. We're going to be looking at the Ten Commandments today. The Ten Commandments are often thought of as, the law, but really it's sort of the highlights of the law, or a table of contents of the law, if you will. There's 613 specific commandments that are given in the Old Testament law. The Decalogue, the 10, are the biggest. They are the most important. They are the ones that sort of serve as the table of contents for all of the other ones. All of the other laws that you look at in the Old Testament wind up falling into one of these categories. You shall not covet. What exactly does that mean? You shall not steal. What exactly does that mean? What if I find something lying in a field? What do I do with that? Is it finders keepers? Or, what if it's not my field, and what if it's nobody's field? What if it's somebody's field, but it's not my field? And, you have to start going through all of these scenarios and you get into these, okay, that's the specificity of it. But the bigger concept is, if it's not yours, don't take it. That's an easy thing. I was at Costco the other day, and the happiest store that I can go to. It's the only retail place that I don't find to be miserable. I actually find joy there and happiness. Everywhere else I view as punishment, like I got to get in and get out. I know I can survive. But Costco's a happy place. But more to the point, I was there and the blackberries looked really good, and so I bought 2 containers of them as I was pushing my cart, and I was hungry. There were a few samples out, but there weren't that many, and the blackberries were calling to me, and so I was eating these blackberries as I was walking through the store. And, by the time I got up to the register, there were 7 blackberries left in the container. I mean, it wasn't a big container. It wasn't a 2-pound one. It was like one of them, it was bigger than a pint. I mean, it was, not huge. And so I wind up eating, all but a handful of the blackberries. And the guy goes to ring it up, and he holds it up, and he looks at it, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Did you know it was like this? Did you mean to buy it?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's my fault, because, they disappeared one at a time as I went through the store." And he just looked so surprised that anybody would bring up something like that and actually pay for it instead of just throwing it away. And he rang it up and was just really, he's like, "And you still want to buy it?" is what he said to me. I go, "Yeah, I ate them. I need to pay for them," But just this look on his face of surprise, and I thought, it's not a good thing that people just are like, "Yeah, I'm gonna, if I can eat it in the store, then I don't have to pay for it." And I just thought to myself, I'm sure they could afford it, but it's not mine. I can't take it. So I paid for it, and I got home, and I finished the other 7 of them. It didn't seem like a lot of point in putting it in the fridge at that point, so I just went ahead and ate the rest of the blackberries. They were good. But these commandments govern our interactions in everyday life. And they govern how we're supposed to behave and our relationships with God and with people. And so as we look at the commandments, there's 2 broad categories of commandments. The first 4 commandments deal with our relationship with God, our supreme creator, and how we obey and how we worship. Unless you're Catholic or Lutheran, then it's the first 3, because they break the coveting into 2 at the end. It's an interesting thing. I remember going to a Catholic school and being confused because the commandments were different. I went to write them out, and I got taken off because my 6th commandment was not it was murder, and it was supposed to be adultery. And I'm like, but that's... And he goes, no, the 6th looks like the pregnant lady. That's the adultery. And I'm like, oh, that is an interesting way to remember that, but I don't know that it's true. But it's interesting that depending on how you count them, sometimes you will run into people that will break them out a little differently, and it boils down to, is making an idol fall into the first one of you shall have no other gods? And the Jewish nation has it as 2 separate commandments. When you look at the original Hebrew text of it, the way it's actually written with space between 10 different blocks. And so the answer is, yeah, it's 2, and the coveting is all 1, because that's the way it was originally written. And so you look at it, but there are 2 categories. How do we deal with the Lord? How do we deal with people? And they are so different and unique from other ancient laws. Like a lot of times people will say, well, there's just a lot of similarity there between like the Code of Hammurabi or other Old Testament, or other ancient world codes and laws. And so Moses really wasn't original here. He was just copying what was already out there. They'll try to discount it. And there are similarities, but that's because the law has been written in the heart of every man. We all wake up and know, so nobody has to tell you it's wrong to kill somebody. You don't really need somebody else to tell you that is something you should not deal. You don't really need somebody else to tell you that it's wrong to take somebody else's stuff. You know that that's not right. They're written into your heart. But the difference with Moses' 10 commandments that he's given from God is that they also incorporate this rich spiritual component of a relationship with God and what it means to be a royal priesthood, a chosen people, a holy nation. And how do we live that out? And so when you look at other ancient law codes, they are very civil in nature. It's very contractual. It's very, this is how we order a society. It's much more like reading a civil law code than it is reading a religious doctrine, because there is not that component involved in it. And that's what makes the 10 Commandments so unique. And that's what makes them so special. And so what I'd like to do for about 5 minutes is break into tables, and I'm going to give each table, what do we have? We have 5 tables. No, we have 4 tables. No, we have 5 tables.
We have 5 tables.
5 tables. I'm going to give each of you 2 commandments to talk about. And then that way, as we kind of go through them, each table can share what insights they have into each set of these commandments. And so what we want to do is, starting back there, we're going to give you 1 and 2. Okay? On this end over here, you're going to get 3 and 4. All right? I'm going to break God's commandments out across the room so you can't hear each other. No cheating. And then we'll give you 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10. And so let's just take 5 minutes and we'll go from there. So talk about them and ask yourselves, I should have been more specific. It's fair. So talk about them and then ask yourself, what does each commandment mean? What is Moses trying to teach the people of Israel that God has taught him? What does each commandment mean? What does it mean for them? What does it mean for you? And then what does that commandment reveal to you about the nature, the character of God? What does that tell you about God? And we'll go from there. He is one, that he is sovereign, and that he is supreme, right? And that there's no infighting like you were talking about. I remember reading Greek mythology in high school, and grade school, reading the story of the Odyssey and, the Trojan Wars. And, you read these stories and, you watch as people go through their lives, but they're pawns in this sort of game that's going on among the gods who are amusing themselves or having fights, and the people that are living their life are sort of arbitrarily at the whims of these immature, angry, weird, depends on my mood, kind of supreme deities that might be in competition or be conflicting with one another, and you might be in the middle of it. And so it's this chaos. It's this free-for-all of, hey, just do your best. You don't know what's going to happen next. And that is so the opposite of the character and the nature of God. God is perfect balance and harmony and order, and there is no deception, there is no deviation, there is no changing mind, there is just this eternal perfection, and that he reigns supreme. So what about the second commandment? How does it tie in that you shouldn't have idols?
I think he's mainly just wanting everybody to know that he's a jealous God, and he doesn't want anybody else bound before any other gods.
Okay.
It's kind of like the physical, I guess, the creation aspect. As the first verse was like, don't worship another creator, but the second one is more of, don't worship any creation either.
Yeah, that's good. For sure, because that is the idea that, you can't make a God. You can't do that. That's creation. That's something I made. And these idols are, God mocks them as you go through the prophets and you look at their lead up to captivity. And he's like, what are you doing worshiping a piece of wood? You're like, let me get this straight. You chop down a tree, and part of it you chop up to use for firewood, to heat your food. Part of it you use to build a building, and part of it you use to scrape dung off the ground. And then part of it, that's an actual illustration provided for. He's like, let me get this straight. So you're going to take part of this tree, you're going to use it to scoop fertilizer. Then you're going to take the other part of this tree and you're going to worship it. How ridiculous does that sound? But yet that's what carving idols does. And so what does that reveal about the nature, the attributes of God?
It's a personal aspect. It says that pride and jealous God is intimately invested in us and wants a relationship with us. Because you're not going to be jealous of something you never would have had. You could, but more than likely you're going to be jealous of someone you have a relationship with. So God wants a relationship with us. He is just shows the personal aspect of God.
Yeah, he's a jealous God. That is, he's not sharing. He is not interested in having something else competing for your love, your time, your affection. That's not that will not make a relationship with God. And that makes sense in our human relationships, does it? Does it not? I mean, You hope to be married one day and to have a spouse, and how would your spouse feel if he or she has to compete with other people to get your time and your attention? It's incredibly disrespectful, right? It's incredibly angering. It destroys marriages. It's part of where the toxicity of social media comes in. If you're married and you're a husband and you're following a bunch of Instagram models and, liking their photos, how does that make your wife feel? If you're a married man and your wife loves to post provocative pictures on Instagram for likes to get attention, how does that make you feel? It's corrosive and it's toxic because it destroys the intimacy and creates jealousy that is not for each other but for outside forces. And God is the same way. He will not tolerate jealousy. He will not tolerate you fading away. He is a jealous God. He wants a relationship with you. You put anything between you and him, he is going to work to break that. And it doesn't have to be, a tree trunk. We think about idols in terms of stones and statues, but, for us, your phone can be an idol. Your money can be an idol. Your job can be an idol. There's lots of things that can take a supreme position between you and the Lord. Okay, what about Commandments 3 and 4? Who over at our other table would like to read Exodus 20, verses 7 through 11? Okay. So the third one is, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And what does that mean to you guys as you talked about it?
Yeah, so I think today we see a whole lot of people use his name in anger, and it's a misuse of his name. You see a whole lot of GDs, or you may have like law call on the corner preachers standing on their boxes condemning people in his name. It's just a misuse of his name, and it's not bringing glory to his name.
Certainly. That's a huge component of it. When we vulgarize his name. And another part of it is when we call ourselves believers, but then in his name, we walk around talking about how we're a Christian, but then we do very un-Christ-like things. Do we not take the name of the Lord in vain when we do that? When you go to a restaurant and sit down and you order and you start witnessing to the waitress, and then your order is wrong and you scream at her, and you want to know why she couldn't get it right in the computer, or you didn't check it, or you leave her a terrible tip, or any of those types of things that you see, how does that convey the name of God to that person? Does that cheapen the name of God? Does it degrade the name of God? And so what does that reveal about God's nature? What attributes about God does that reveal? Yeah. He is holy. Yeah. Amen. Yeah, he is a holy God. And so when you do anything that desecrates his name, you are desecrating something that is holy, something that is perfect. And that is a terrible and grievous thing. And we see the nation of Israel in the Old Testament do that repeatedly as they commit spiritual adultery. In a lot of ways, this commandment is about spiritual adultery. It is about claiming the name of God while being unfaithful to honor that name. And going out and doing what you want to do despite being married to God, being unfaithful. And that is a form of spiritual adultery. And that is really what all of these commandments, actually we have one more. This is the Sabbath. We'll hold on to that a second. These first three commandments, when you think about all of them and how they govern your relationship with God, it's about being faithful to God and not committing spiritual adultery. We see time and again in the Old Testament people being punished as they stray from God and they commit spiritual adultery. They have idols. They worship other gods. They engage in other behaviors. And when we commit spiritual adultery, the road from spiritual adultery to living in sin, committing the rest of these things that we are about to look at, is very much shorter than we can really like to think about. Because as soon as you start committing spiritual adultery, as soon as you start falling away from drawing near holiness, then all that other sin becomes a lot more comfortable, familiar, and easy to engage in. Someone who is in a covenant, holy relationship with God, who is focused on God, who is loving God, who would never think of desecrating the name of God, well, all these other things become so much simpler to perform because you just wouldn't think of doing them, because you would want to reflect the nature and character of God. And so it flows from spiritual adultery. And we see time and again that as a nation begins to commit spiritual adultery, that's when all these other problems begin to crop up. You know, church attendance falls, spirituality falls, people reading the Bible falls, then crime starts going up, then single-parent household rates start going up, then, depravity starts going up, then sinfulness starts taking an uptick. But it doesn't start there. It starts with, as in Judges says, and then a generation came up that did not know the word of the Lord or the things that he had done for them. And thus everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It starts with not knowing. And the only way to know is to read his word. You have to read it. There's nothing more important than studying it. The fourth one was the Sabbath, right? So what does that reveal about God's nature?
I actually had an interesting interaction regarding this verse a couple of months ago. Some evangelists came to my apartment and they tried to evangelize with several different things, but one of the ones they tried to evangelize on was how I was disobeying God's law because I worshiped on Sunday instead of Saturday. Because if we look at our calendar, Saturday is the seventh day.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I told him was, when I read about this commandment, to me it's while all of them are to our benefit, this one's the most apparent to our benefit because it forces us to take a day and rest, and that's the meaning behind it. Whether you're taking that day to rest and worship God on Saturday or Sunday, you're still fulfilling this commandment.
Yeah, and we don't worship on the Sabbath. We worship on the Lord's Day. We worship on the day that Jesus resurrected, which was a habit instituted by the first Christians. See, Peter, it was on the Lord's Day that I was in worship and praying. Like, the Lord's Day, what day is that? That's Sunday. But yes, the important thing is that there is a day of rest, that there is a day of worship, that is something that you do. And what does that tell us about God's nature?
You need time to actually come together with God. He's a relational God. Because when we work and we're busy, it takes our time away from spending the time with the Lord, you know. But like on the day, I feel like life happens. You can't just always come to church on Sunday, right? So like if something happens to where we're not able to make it to church on Sunday, we can actually have a Sabbath day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, as long as it's a day set apart just for the Lord, you know. But what it tells us about God is He's relational, and He doesn't just want to do work and do, and not actually take the time, you know, like, sit down and rest.
Yeah.
You know.
Does it tell us anything else?
Enjoy the things that we already have done.
Yeah, that he's relational. What else does it tell us about him? Any other thoughts? How about his generosity? How about his love for us in the sense that he cares about you so much, he's generous enough. He doesn't want you to be exhausted. He wants you to have rest. It's not a bad thing to have rest. It's not a bad thing to take a break.
Yeah, I was talking about this week, waiting, and not having to do anything is actually a blessing. Sometimes we think, oh, I have to wait, gotta wait on my food, gotta wait on Chick-fil-A, but it's a blessing because someone else is doing the work, and the Sabbath is like a waiting time, and I was thinking about it. It's like God's saying it's okay to enjoy life. It's okay to not have to work, and we're trusting Him when we do that. And eventually Israel doesn't trust the Lord, and they don't keep the Sabbath, and they forget Him. They forget He's their provider. And so that was cool this week, talking about waiting, and just being patient. Sometimes it's like I don't want to be patient, but now thinking about it in those terms, it's nice that God has done so much for us, and we're waiting on Him to return. We're waiting on Him to give us salvation.
Yeah, Sabbath isn't a punishment. Sabbath isn't a straitjacket. It's not a duty. It's a gift. It's meant to be a gift for us to enjoy and to be able to move forward. We need to move to the next one. All right, 5 and 6. Who wants to read Exodus 20, 12, and 13?
Honor your father and mother, then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you, and you must not murder.
Yes. Honor your parents and don't kill people. So, honoring your parents. What does that mean for you guys when you hear that?
I think not only so like in actions and obviously like obeying them, but also too I think in a sense maybe too it's calling us to honor them in our hearts. I think there's a verse that's like honor the Lord as holy in your hearts, and so I think too in a sense we need to honor them as well, and not just we may not feel it emotionally, we may not want to do what they want us to do, but I think it just it's really you trusting the Lord, because we know that our earthly parents are by no means perfect because we're all sinners and we fall short, but I think it just kind of shows ultimately reverence towards the Lord that you're trusting Him.
Yeah. And what does this tell us about His nature or the attributes of God? What is this honoring your parents? What does this tell us about God?
Your relationship with your parents is kind of supposed to be, I guess, like a physical example of what God is supposed to be to you and how you're supposed to react to Him.
Yeah, it's modeling authority, right? This idea that we're under authority, we're under our parents' authority, but we're also under God's authority. And real quick, and parents are intended to be the primary transmitters of the instructions and the commandments of God. When we read Deuteronomy 6, the Shema, hear, O Lord, you are one, and you shall teach these things to your children. And when you rise up, and when you lie down, and when you walk by the way. Keep in mind that, the church's role is not to be the primary educator of your children in the ways of the Lord. That is a very secondary reinforcement. Instruction in the word of the Lord begins at home around the table. And so the Lord is commanding you to honor your parents because your parents are supposed to be transmitting to you the knowledge of the Lord, and it comes with a promise that it goes well with you and you will live long in the land. And that makes sense because when you honor your parents and they teach you the knowledge of the Lord and you obey the Lord and you're living under the Lord, that brings health, long life, these things that come with obedience to what the Lord designs for you to do.
That's exactly, I was going to hit on the first command with the promise point, but it shows God should not say that he is a promise keeper. He just straight up tells us, hey, that's a promise that you can rely on. So.
Yeah, Paul talks about, this is, the first command with a promise. You can take it to the bank. Honor your parents, and it's going to go well with you.
You're also supposed to honor your parents even when they don't follow the Lord's commandments. I don't have any scripture necessarily to back that up, but I think a lot of this verse, what it's saying is to just honor them in all that you do, and don't speak ill of them, and you don't want to go around bad mouthing your parents even if they weren't great. That just makes you that takes away your witness to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even when they're wrong, we should honor them. Now, we shouldn't honor them in the sense of if they command you to sin. That's not, the Lord is not saying that you should. He does not say you shall obey your parents blindly and without question. And, if they command you to build an idol, you shall continue to obey. That is not the way it is written. But honoring them means that we should try to be obedient to them. But obviously, if they are asking you to do something wrong, the way that you would not do that is important. You still need to honor them and go, I love you, and I care about you, and you're my parents, and I hate to say no. But the Lord says, and, I can't do that.
That's part of loving.
Yeah. And that.
Loving is sometimes saying no, because it's not, that's what God does.
Yeah.
You ask for something that's not His will, He says no. It's not loving.
Yeah, better is the rebuke of a friend than the kiss of an enemy. And what about the next one? We, don't kill. What is that? I think we all can understand what that means. Don't kill anybody. Don't. There's plenty of examples. But what does that reveal to us about God's nature, His attributes? He's loving, right?
And it reminded me of John. I was telling them it reminded me of like John 10:10 and like how, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but he came so that we may have life and life to the full. So he's about that abundant life. He's not about. I think sometimes the enemy can have us about give us thoughts where like, oh, God's trying to terrorize you, He's trying to kill you, He's trying to do all these things against you, but that going back to the nature of God, that's not who He is.
Yeah, His nature is love, and so He doesn't want you. This is how they will know that you are my disciples, by your love for one another. Greater love has no one than this, that they would lay down their life for another. It's the opposite of killing somebody.
And killing it brings wrath and strife and anger, and it's not the fruit of the Spirit. And God is not. That's not His nature for human beings to hate one another, to be enemies of each other. And as Cain killed his brother, first murder. We see malice of him.
And killing ultimately is the final manifestation of all of the sins that lead up to it. You know, in Proverbs, it talks about the thief being a man of violence. And don't go their way with them. Ultimately, it will cost you your life. When we think about sin, we think about crime, we think about, what does jealousy provoke? It provokes anger. And when you steal, it builds a lust for more and more. And eventually just a property crime isn't enough. Now I need to rob somebody while they're home. I'm not patient enough to wait until they're gone. And then if I kill them, then that's fine. And when we think about murder, it's the ultimate pinnacle of sin against one another. And we are all created in the image of God. We are all image bearers. And so when we kill, we are destroying the image of God. Satan has always been after the image bearers of God since the beginning. He goes after and tries to kill. We always see in the Bible that, we have these, I'm going to kill all the children. He goes after the children in Exodus. He goes after the children when Jesus is born. Satan has always been out to destroy the image of God and the image bearers. And when we kill, we are doing what Satan would have us do, which is to destroy the image of God.
Also, I feel like it's not so much just physical murder, but also like spirit, emotional, spiritual, mental. Like there's death in life and the power of the tongue. So sometimes our words cut deep. They actually kill parts of us or parts of others. What we say can actually be hurtful to others and actually kill and relationships and things die sometimes because of what we say.
Yeah, and our thoughts are that way too. Jesus talks about adultery and goes, well, whoever has had lust in their heart has committed adultery. When we think about being violent towards another, we're committing a form of that sin even if we are not. Moving on to commandments 7 and 8. This table here. Who would like to read Exodus 20 verses 14 and 15?
You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal.
I like him. Right to the point. All right, so what does you shall not commit adultery, what does that mean for you guys when you hear that? Or what do you hope that means, or what do you think that means for, God willing, a future marriage? How do you think that would apply within a marriage covenant? Is it just a strict, hey, everything's fine as long as you're not, sleeping with somebody, as long as you don't, Or is there a lot more covered than just the actual physical act of cheating?
Well, so this goes a little bit far, but my dad actually won't be in a room with his secretary alone, with the door open.
The Billy Graham rule.
So there's a bit more of like a rebuke that tries to come his way, but just avoids at all costs. You can't even say that I slept with my secretary because we're never in the same car alone. We're never in a room with the door closed. We never have a text conversation that doesn't have her husband or my wife on the thread. There's just, you definitely shouldn't sleep with someone other than your spouse, but you can take extra precaution to just avoid even the appearance of evil.
Yeah, there's a big bright line there, and that is absolutely true. I used to teach an adult Bible study, and most of the people in there were married. And if I got a text message from somebody in the class that was, one of the women that was married, I would typically want to add in immediately their husband, and I would much rather talk to both of you than one of you, just because I don't want to even theoretically, maybe, possibly have somebody accuse or think of something. And when you have their husband in on the thread, you immediately eliminate any temptation that might be in your mind to say something that could even be misconstrued as inappropriate. You've helped keep yourself from peril by creating a bright line there. So, Grace?
Also, you mentioned the social media. That's a huge one. Like, I don't think many people that are married can follow, these Instagram models, or even follow somebody that they know but they post explicit pictures. It's like, you liking that picture alone is like adultery. Like, you are entertaining it. You are saying post more, continue. And it's like, it's technically no different than watching porn. So, yeah, definitely, like, lust of the heart is where that begins.
It's so toxic for our relationships when our heart gravitates away from loving our spouse wholly. Parker?
Yeah, so Matthew chapter 5, Jesus repeats the commandments. You should not kill, and then also you should not commit adultery. And he says, you've heard that it was said that you shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery in his heart. And if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it far from you. It's more profitable that one of your members should perish instead of your whole body being cast into hell. So, if you struggle with lust on maybe social media, or if you struggle with lust on the phone or something, or you struggle with lust with a person that you're really close to, like a secretary, whatever it is, cut it out. It's better for you to get rid of that thing in your life than for you to continue in sin and for it to be a part of you. So it does start in the mind. And then also, I think that advice that Christ talks about, taking something that seems so close to you or such a part of your identity, especially in our world with the whole LGBTQ movement. People in that movement, they think of themselves as, I am a lesbian, I am gay, I am trans, and they've identified the sin so close to themselves. It's they view themselves differently, and so Jesus says to them that take that out, cut it out. It's not a member of you. Take it out and cast it far from you. So that's the advice for, I think, everyone who has who views their own body as a member of sin. You've got to recognize the sin and pluck it out and cast it far from you.
Absolutely. And what about stealing? I think we all know what that means. But what does that teach us about God's nature?
Okay, I think actually the two kind of go together, where you might lust after another man's wife, or commit adultery, or steal because you want something that you don't have, and God is telling us not to do these things. And it also comes with a promise that He will provide for us, but we don't need to go take what others have or defile a marriage bed to satisfy our desires, because it is provided for us.
Yeah, He is our provider. And when we trust in Him and we have a relationship with Him, He promises to meet our every need. Jesus talks about, look at the birds of the field, look at the sparrow, and your heavenly Father loves and provides for them. Will He not for you that much more? When you steal, it conveys a lack of faith that the Lord is going to provide for you. And so I need to take matters into my own hand and desecrate the name of God, and go out and do something that is wrong. And so when we look at these, they are about maintaining, again, a covenant relationship with God and trusting that He is going to provide. And as we engage in behaviors like lusting or thinking about things that aren't ours, ultimately that leads us down a path where we have to battle sin multiple times. If I'm looking at the wrong things, now I have to constantly make decisions not to go the wrong way. It is a lot easier to make one good disciplined decision in the beginning of, hey, I struggle with social media and I'm married, so I'm just not going to have that or follow that. I'm just not even going to get on there, and then that way I don't have to worry about it. Look, if I'm struggling with, eating correctly, then it's a good idea to not buy the whole cake, bring it home and go, you know what, I'm just going to have a thin slice every day as a treat. And, this is going to last me a week and a half. And now I have to make, every time I open the refrigerator, I have to have a victory choice to not have some more of the cake. I've got to be strong every single time I look at the triple chocolate fudge thing sitting in the fridge, instead of just walking past it at the grocery store and going, I'm not going to bring that home. I had to make one good choice and that's it. Now I don't have to make that decision. But when we make bad decisions, they lead us to have to constantly battle over and over and rehash it. And we see Jesus, he doesn't entertain Satan when he's tempted in the desert. Instead, he just rebukes him and sends him away. He doesn't go down the path of, well, we'll talk about it for a minute. No, just close the door. Your life will be so much better without you even, look but don't touch. Touch but don't taste. Taste but don't eat. No, that doesn't work. All right, last two commandments. Exodus 20:16 and 17.
You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's.
Okay, so the first one, you shall not bear false witness, no lying. What does that commandment mean to you guys?
In one way, I was thinking, don't hate your neighbor, love them, but despite what may be going on with your neighbor and their family or whatnot. But there's other ways to look at it.
I mean, it certainly, indicates not to trap someone with any kind of falsehood, that kind of thing. It sort of is in line with loving your neighbor as yourself. You wouldn't want kind of someone to come against you, in a setting, like the communities that they have, that kind of thing. I guess the conversation would be, does it cover lying in all instances, that sort of thing in this commandment, or is it sort of,
What's interesting is when we look at Proverbs, and it talks about the things that God hates in Proverbs, lying's the one thing that comes up twice on the list. And it talks about lying lips, but also speaking falsehoods. And, it's tempting to go, somebody asks me a direct question, I give them a direct answer, and so I told the truth. But if you only tell the truth up to a point, if you leave out part of the information, are you actually telling the truth? Or are you, through what you leave out and the false impression you create, are you actually deceiving them? Are you lying?
what if their intentions are to do evil to someone else? Would that be loving your neighbor by withholding certain information?
Well, Proverbs talks about it being wise to know when to keep your mouth shut. And so sometimes not answering a question at all can be the right answer of just going, we're not going to talk about it. But, God is truth. And, Jesus says that whenever you lie, you are never more like the devil than when you lie, because he was a liar from the beginning. And we have to be careful. There's nothing wrong with being pointed and direct and very specific in how you answer something, so that you're not elaborating and allowing somebody to trap you. But it's also important that your answer be honest. and that it be truthful, because you don't want to deceive people. What does this attribute of God, what does this tell us about God? The do not bear false witness.
God is truth, and God Jesus came. He's the way, the truth, and the life. And you don't accept, lies. The devil, he's the father of lies, and he knows that lies will just bring negativity, and it will just bring like false false teaching, and false stuff that's not true.
Yeah, God is truth. Mark, you were about to say something? Or?
I was gonna say,
Oh, yeah.
and the fact that Jesus is perfect, so he can't lie. There's no way, he can't lie because he's perfect.
Yeah, God is trustworthy. His nature is one that is loving and trustworthy, and when he tells us something, we can believe it. And so we should reflect that nature as image bearers of God. When we say something, it should be trustworthy and believable, no different than what our Creator would do. And what about the final one, coveting? What does that mean to you guys?
The way that I interpreted that was it kind of goes back to when the Lord said that to love thy neighbor, and you wouldn't covet someone that you love's partner in any sense, or whatever they own, or their house. So that's how I interpreted it as.
Yeah, that we should not be wanting the things that are not ours, because it's not trusting as God as our provider. And look, comparison is the thief of joy. You could get a brand new car and just be tickled to death. And, oh man, this is the most amazing thing ever. And then a week later, your neighbor pulls up and they bought the nicer model. And you're like, oh no, now I'm not happy anymore. There's always going to be something around the corner that is nicer or better. And, Proverbs talks about like death and Sheol are never satisfied. Neither are the eyes of man ever satisfied. If your worth and your happiness is tied up in things more, that coveting nature, that desire for things, is a form of an idol that leads you away from a relationship with God, and it keeps you from being happy. And when you desire things that are not yours, it puts lust in your heart. It puts idolatry in your heart. It puts contempt in your heart. It begins to spur all of this negative soil, and all of it starts from coveting. And it creates this sinful manifestation inside of us, and it is an appeal to our sinful nature. I mean, that is why advertising is so effective, because it appeals to your coveting nature, your sinful nature. You walk by, you see a TV commercial and you're like, I didn't even know that existed until I saw that commercial. I didn't know that was something that was on the planet, and now I have to have it. Really? You were perfectly happy a minute ago and you didn't know it existed. Now you have to have it. It's just so toxic for us, and it takes away from what does God desire for us when it comes to Him. And desire Him, right? Above all. Doesn't God want you to desire Him? And so what happens when you're coveting?
You're not happy.
You're not desiring.
Yeah, you're not desiring God, right, Grace?
I would take a step further, like when you're desiring God, everything else falls into place the way it should. And another character of like what God doesn't want you to covet is because you're settling for less than what God wants to do for you, or wants to do through you. So it's like you're not living the abundant life when you're disobeying His commandments.
It's such a distraction, right? I mean, you think about all the time you spend coveting things. It's all squandered, lost opportunity time to do something actually meaningful for the kingdom of God. Parker?
I'd say you're doubting the provision of God, and then also you're doubting His promise. And what is the promise that we have? He says that in my Father's house there are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. And that place is going to be a good place for us. It's comfortable. In this life you will have trouble. But, be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. We'll have trouble here. And so when we have trouble, we need to remember the promise of God. We need to be satisfied with what He provides us. And sometimes He provides trials and tribulations. We talk about praying for the nations. We talk about praying for revival. That's not going to be, awesome all the time. It's not going to be fun all the time. But it says in Corinthians, we can be comforted through every trial. So when we're on the mission field, we can be comforted in the trials. We're praying for this Christian guy this morning. He can be comforted in any tribulation that he has because we have a greater reward. So we can not have to covet the things on this world, but look to that city that we're going to be given when He comes in His kingdom.
Amen. And coveting, it's one of the reasons that, you can look at communism and socialism and immediately know that those are systems that are broken and anti-God, is because the entire foundation of it is poured on the idea of coveting. Look at what your neighbor's got. It's not fair. Ownership is theft. Let's go take that and redistribute it. The entire foundation of it is coveting. And you shouldn't have it. I can't have it. You can't have it. It's all about take it away. Coveting. Anything rooted in coveting is inherently a bad deal. All right, conclusion. So we have a few minutes to relax here before service. Think about a commandment this week that you feel like the Lord is calling you to work on in your life. Hopefully not murder. Hopefully that's not the one. Don't take the easy way out and go, I'm going to focus on not killing anybody this week. And unless you're an assassin, then that's, if you're leading a double life, then yeah, that might be a good starting point. But unless that's you, think about a commandment this week that you want to try to seek to obey in every single situation you find yourself in. Grace?